Hello, I'm Jim Rich. I'm the chaplain at Springhouse Estates and glad to be with you for this Acts devotional. The last time I did a devotional, we were looking at Psalm 57, and we've been looking at the Psalms of David that have a historical superscription at the beginning, and they're important because they give us a bit of a background from the Old Testament as to what was going on in David's life when he wrote that particular psalm. So I'd invite you to take your Bibles and turn to Psalm 56. We're going to start with the heading on that, and it says, "To the choir master, according to the dove on far-off terebinths." Now that's some sort of title or tune name. A miktam, probably again a kind of genre of music, or maybe it's a liturgical term. A miktam of David when the Philistines seized him in Gath, and that's what we want to focus on today, that part of the heading that gives us a historical clue as to what David was experiencing when he finally sat down to write this 56th Psalm. And the Philistines seizing him in Gath, of course, the Israelites had multiple neighbors, and some of them were the Philistines. Now, the heading doesn't give us any historical information about where to go look for the backstory, but we know that David and his adventures with the Philistines are in 1 Samuel. And so if we go back to 1 Samuel, we'll see that David gets in trouble with Saul, and Saul has him on the run, and David is really running for his life, and he goes several different places, and Saul is chasing him down. And at one point in 1 Samuel 21, David goes to the town or city of Nob, and there he encounters the priest Ahimelech, who gives David bread. Because David's on the run, he really has nothing to sustain him while he's on the run from Saul. And David realizes while he's there that he could also use a weapon because he's defenseless. And Ahimelech the priest says, well, Goliath's sword is in the town of Gath. You could go get that. And David said, yeah, actually, that's a great sword. I'm going to go get it. Now, what we have to keep in mind here is that when David said he's going to the town of Gath, he's actually going to Saul's hometown, because we know from 1 Samuel 17, when Goliath appears on the scene, he is listed as being from the hometown of Gath. So how desperate must David be in this situation on the run from Saul to be willing to go to Goliath's hometown? David killed the hometown hero, and David's actually going to go and get Goliath's sword. So you have to know that David is really in desperate straits to be willing to go that far to get what he needs. And actually, when he gets there, he's identified, and he also realized that before he left the previous town, that one of Saul's spies, actually a man who was Saul's chief shepherd, spotted David, and that's what made David decide to go to Gath, because that was less of a problem than being caught by Saul. And so we see that when David gets into the town of Gath, that he's recognized there, and people say, is this not David, the king of the land? Did they not sing of this one as they dance, saying, Saul has struck his thousands, and David his 10,000s? So immediately, David is ID'd, and he is now being threatened. And so he decides to turn to the Lord. And so that takes us back to Psalm 56. That is the setting. And eventually David sat down when he escaped from this situation. And he said in verse 1 of Psalm 56, "Be gracious to me, O God, for man tramples on me. All day long an attacker oppresses me." Now, we may not be in a situation which is as life-threatening as David, but when we get into jams, what do? Do we use as our first or initial impression to turn inward and say, oh, how am I going to fix this problem? Well, David gives us a clue that turning inward is not really the way to go, but he turned outward and he went right to the Lord, and he brings his complaint or his petition to the Lord and explains that in very vivid language that men are trampling on him and oppressing him. And he calls out to the Lord to be gracious to me. What a great place to start whenever we find ourselves in difficulty, that we should go to the Lord, because God is a gracious God, and he will give us the favor that we do not deserve. So that's our first point that we look at as we look at David in this psalm. And I'd encourage you this week, if you find yourself in difficult straits, don't turn inward, but look upward and look to the Lord. Amen.